Okay, are we all okay? Morning. And welcome colleagues from Lancashire Council here today. This is the Accounts Commission meeting being held in Glasgow for the first time, changed from our usual Edinburgh venue. The public session of today's meeting is being recorded, and the recording of this meeting will be made available via the Accounts Commission website as soon as possible and also available on request. Members of the public are also welcome to observe the public session of the Commission's meeting. Those who are watching this morning, thank you for finding the time to join us, but you are observing and not participating. You therefore can you have your camera and microphone off, but I think it's already off. In case there's any chance you might be in, please keep your camera and microphone off. For anybody participating in the meeting who's joining us online, please keep your camera off and microphone on mute, except when it's your turn, your item to be discussed. May I also ask all who are speaking during the meeting, whether here in person or online, to speak clearly and loudly because of the benefit of the recording and for colleagues or observers who have reduced hearing. And I'm conscious the microphone is in the middle of the table, so those at the end, please make sure you enunciate and maybe not shout, but certainly make it clear. Okay, that takes us to item 1. Apologies for absence, Sarah.
Yeah, with apologies from Andy Cowie, Christine Lester and Ruth McLeod. All other members are in the room today.
Item 2 is declarations of connections. As members are aware, I have a connection with the Renfrewshire report in items 5 and 10 on the agenda as former chair of the board of Hub West Scotland, which is a partner with Renfrewshire Council in delivering capital projects. Because of that, and after consulting with our deputy ethics partner, I will recuse myself of taking part in those 2 items on today's agenda. Andrew Burns, as our deputy chair, will chair those discussions in my place. However, given that I am no longer on that board, I will remain in the room. Can I ask any other members of any connection or interest regarding any items on today's agenda? Please state the connection or interest and whether they consider it material enough to need to recuse themselves. Carol.
Report because I'm a board member of CPAT and one of their board champions for flooding, so I'll excuse myself from the room for that item. Thank you.
I've got a connection in relation to item 15, quality of public audit in Scotland. I'm the chief exec of a public body that is audited within that, but I don't consider in relation to discussing the report that I need to recuse myself.
That takes us to item 3, order of business. As normal, I will seek the Commission's approval for the order of business today. I propose that we consider items 9 to 17 in private for the reasons set out in our agenda. Our members agreed. Okay. 4 minutes of the last meeting and follow up. Sarah.
Thanks, Chair. So first of all, I'm happy to take any issues of accuracy that members might have last minute. No. So I'm obviously assuming that you've read the minute in conjunction with the action tracker, but there's a further 3 items that I'd just like to highlight. Item 4, the Argyll and Bute visit has been arranged now for 28th of May. The Chair will cover more on that in her update. Item 7, which is Joe's Insight event, that had to be rescheduled and it's now scheduled for the 22nd of May. So it'd be great if members could join Joe either in person or online. And item 14, I think after checking with members, we're going to take the Audit Scotland quarterly reports via correspondence, which means that they can be distributed to members closer to the time that they're considered by the board. Happy to take any questions or comments in a minute.
No more questions, comments, so agreed to approve. Thank you. Substantive item for today's session, which is the best value in Renfrewshire Council, and as a consequence of not having the connection, and handing over to Andrew to read the rest of this section.
Okay, thanks very much, Joe. Morning, colleagues. So as Joe said, I'm going to chair this item 5 and also in public, and item 10 when we come back to discuss Renfrewshire in private after, I think it's the lunch break and so on. I think we've got about an hour and 5-10 minutes at the most to cover all of this. So if colleagues could help me out in that regard, that would be great. If we can try and finish by about 11:15, that would be fantastic. So we're obviously joined by Helena as Control of Audit and Gary and Adrian from ASET, who we'll come to in due course. So as you all know, this is the statutory report by the Control of Audit on Best Value in Renfrewshire. The report draws attention to the findings from the Council's 23-24 annual audit report on how effectively the Council demonstrates best value. The Commission's been invited to consider and endorse the Controller's report in this next session, and will then, in private after the break, consider how we wish to proceed. And the Controller and the audit team, Barry and Adrian, are here to provide any clarifications or answers to questions that members may have on both the Controller's report and the audit report as it relates to best value. We have got a break after this session, so I'm conscious of a couple of colleagues from Renfrewshire, which is great to see here in the room. So there will be like a 15-minute break after this session, about 11:15. So if you want to hang around for informal discussion, I stress informal discussion, then you're very welcome to do so. And then we'll reconvene after the break. But I think unless there's any queries on the broad format, I mean, without further ado, I'll hand over to Helena and colleagues to introduce the report.
Good morning, everybody. I welcome the opportunity to discuss my best value report of Renfrewshire Council with the Commission this morning, and I'm delighted to be joined by Gary and Adrian from ASET, who led the audit work, and for their work on the audit. Auditors have concluded that Renfrewshire Council remains committed to the principles of best value and has made good progress in implementing previous auditor recommendations arising from both best value reports and statutory reports. Auditors have specifically noted improvements in levels of scrutiny by the Audit Risk and Scrutiny Board and the steps the Council has taken to self-assess its organisational culture using an innovative new approach called the Culture Assessment Model developed with the Improvement Service, as well as the actions it is taking to further strengthen transparency and openness in its decision-making. The auditor also reports good progress in the development of consultation and community engagement, including a refresh of the Council's overall approach, with appropriate steps being taken to support effective governance and scrutiny of these arrangements. And the auditor will continue to monitor progress in these areas as part of their 24-25 audit. The auditor has found that performance management arrangements at the Council are robust, with performance monitored through quarterly performance reporting to the corporate management team and scrutiny twice a year between the Chief Executive and each Directorate, with plans for a new performance board this year to drive further improvement in service level performance. Overall, the Council has 57% of its local government benchmarking framework indicators in the top 2 quartiles of Council performance, having fallen slightly from 63% in the base year. The Council has appropriate workforce planning strategies and other policies in place, and has implemented a number of automatic processes to drive efficiency and innovation, although there is scope for improving how progress against its workforce people strategy. I note that the Council is looking at how it can incorporate business case and options appraisal assessments more transparently in its decision-making processes, and its plans in place to link its corporate strategy more clearly to operational plans. Finally, the auditor has concluded that the Council has appropriate financial monitoring arrangements in place. While the Council reports it has delivered significant past savings, it still had to use reserves to close the budget gap in previous years and is forecasting a cumulative budget gap of 33 million by 27-28. It plans to update its medium-term financial strategy in September of this year, and as part of this, it will set out the level of savings it expects to achieve through its transformation programme, Reshaping Renfrewshire. Like many councils, likely they will need to take some difficult decisions on spending the programme. I'll pause there and do
Thanks very much, Alan. I'm sure there will be questions. And I mean, as colleagues know, we usually try and organise this section of the agenda into themes, and we've got 6 themes that I'll read out in a second. I'm going to ask each of our respective colleagues to lead on each of the themes in a second. And we've got actually 2 colleagues who want to ask about one of the themes. And as it happens, by chance, not design, that if you discount myself and Joe and the 3 colleagues who've put apologies in, there are 7 Commission members here, so it should give us a reasonable structure. That's not all to say that when Carol leads off in a section, if somebody else wants to come in, please do so. So the themes are finances. I'll do them in this order: finances, transformation, workforce, community engagement, performance, and leadership. And there's 2 questions in finance. So I'll move to finance first, if that's okay. I'm going to go to Derek and then Carol after that. Derek.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the report. I thought in the whole it was a very good report. I think it's always when we look at these from the outside, it's just trying to make sure that we understand where the council is. So I guess my starting off point is I felt from the report that the council does have very strong financial management. It's got a good track record of achievement and delivery. There's a couple of things in the report I just wanted to tease out to make sure I understand the position properly. The first one would be round about savings. Your report suggests that the council, I assume when it builds that into the budget and the reporting and service performance against budget, you said that there wasn't real clear evidence to know whether the savings had been achieved or not. And yet, paragraph 57 of the report makes reference to 190 million of savings since 2011. This was my first question around about that. If non-delivery of savings isn't routinely reported, what assurances can the Commission take that the Council has a track record of delivering savings? So that, and I suppose in a sense it's in here, what confidence we take that will continue in the future. So that would be my first question. Second one would be about reserves, because I'm just again trying to understand the information that's in the report. It probably is unfortunate the timing of this. I think you said in the introduction the Council's planning to update its medium-term financial strategy, but there did seem to be a gap going forward, and in your report met from reserves, and I think you referenced that used reserves to bridge the budget gap in previous years. So I guess my question arising from that is how sustainable is that going forward? The Council does seem to have quite a substantial balance in earmarked reserves, which seem to come from the service concessions and other sort of one-offs. And so I suppose just trying to tease out how challenging the position is for the Council going forward, how they've balanced the budget in the past seems to be using reserves. Is that a sustainable position? What's the Council strategy in terms of reserves going forward? My third question is again is looking at financial risk, but around the IGIPs, which is mentioned quite extensively in the report. There's been an ongoing financial challenge. I guess like every council's facing that. Just it'd be interesting to hear how the relationship with the IGIP works and what risks are built into the council's medium-term financial strategy in the back of the line.
Thanks very much, Derek. Helen, what's the
There's
leader?
always a lot within that, but I'll go through each of those and I'll bring in Gary and Adrian as well to offer some more detail. But firstly on savings, so the 190 million of savings since 2011 is reported by the council in their council financial outlook and their medium-term financial plan. I think in terms of, and I'll bring in Gary to talk a bit more about the transparency around this, but the way in which the council reports on the savings is that where a saving is agreed, it is then baselined within their opening departmental budget. So non-delivery of the savings is where it's then reported. So it will be reported as an overspend to the relevant departmental board. So I think that's just that slight difference in the way that the council are reporting savings than we've seen before. But perhaps if I pause at that for it and bring in Gary and Adrian, and then we'll come to reserves and the idea in a minute.
Yeah, so Helena has captured the position in relation to how savings are managed and monitored. Eventually, savings have to crystallise in the budget. So at some point, the budget speaks for itself. The number you spend is the number that you spend. And savings are not audited, and they're not audited for a really good reason, because some of them are real in terms of they could be cuts, for example. And it depends on what you mean by the term saving. Is it an efficiency saving where you're transforming the service to deliver the same quality but with less inputs, or is it an actual cut in service, whether or not that's a saving? We don't audit savings. What we audit are the numbers within the accounts, and Helena has just outlined that the council does report savings to full council and to its committees, to its various boards. But we don't audit that, and I think quite rightly, because it's such a moving piece and it's subject to such challenging terminology. The real meat of this, though, is in the financial sustainability of the council against its budget plan. And when you're dealing with savings, they're either going to crystallise and find a way into general reserves, or they are not, as they become overspent and they become the lower general reserves because you've not achieved the saving.
I think there's the final thing on that, and we'll probably come on that. The other part of your question around savings, I think, was around that track record. I think when we come on to discuss transformation, we can talk about some of the work that the council has already delivered in terms of that transformation as well. I suppose to come on to reserves then. So again, as I set out in my opening remarks, the council has used reserves to help manage budget gaps in previous years, as well as helping to afford investment. But the council's medium-term financial plan has recognised that this isn't sustainable, and that their aspiration is to use reserves to support a smooth delivery of savings and manage, I suppose, that pace of recurring savings and that investment. The 25-26 budget agreed the use of reserves of 0.4 million, but if you look at the table, you can see that I think that is largely to support savings and investment. Investment, as you'll see from the budget gap that they've got, really from savings and council tax will be enough, but that gap. And as you've already mentioned, on reserves, the council has a significant level of use of reserves when portion of the budget. Shall I move on to IJBs, and then I can bring in the team as well? So just again on the IJB, so the 23-24 annual audit report of the IJB, and I should say that Gary is not the auditor for the IJB. I know often we have it where we have the auditor of the IJB in the thing. So but the 23-24 annual audit report for the Renfrewshire IJB does highlight a significant risk around the ability to bridge future funding gaps, particularly in 25-26. Now we know that that's a position that is shared by many IJBs across Scotland, and I believe that their CFO has presented a balanced budget, recommended a balanced budget for 25-26. Which does include the drawdown of IJB reserves, and the advice to the IJB suggests that reserves will be fully drawn down by the end of 25-26. So I think in terms of that question around risk, like many councils and IJBs, I think it's absolutely an area that the council and the IJB would need to manage, and they're obviously not alone in that. But I'll bring in Gary and Adrian if there's anything further they want to add.
The commentary I would make on reserves is when I look at Renfrewshire Council, this is a council that has built up strong levels of reserves in the good times, and they're applying those reserves when times are becoming tougher. And I think that's a sign of good financial management over the long term. You're not getting zigzag cuts to services, you're getting a much smoother line in relation to the quality of service the council is able to maintain in more challenging circumstances. And the council is, also has, you see this in the report, but it has really quite ambitious capital investment plans to use those reserves, particularly around the education estate, which has been a feature at this commission meeting and previous meetings. And I would just argue that that's a sign of a financially well managed council.
Thanks, Gary.
No, I think that's helpful. I think Gary's comments at the end of it, that kind of supports the view I kind of formed from reading the documents. That's quite helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. I think I mentioned at the start, there's a couple of questions on finance, and Carol, you had one slightly separate around capital, I think.
Yeah, so mine is on Dargaville, and I'd like to start by saying I congratulate the way you've handled the summary of that and the progress that's been made to date. It's really good to see that people are engagement. And taking that aside, I think the council appears to be performing well, and I welcome the work on the innovation and the workforce development, the digital, the partner working, education and so on. But I have a slight concern taking it back to Dargaville, and I just want to clarify if my understanding of the report is correct, that there's the 45 million now, and then it seems to be suggesting there's 1.2 million from the interest and the ongoing costs, so 2.8 million over 40 years, which is about 157 million in total. So it's really, is that correct? And what's the sort of sacrifice that will be made for that? Or is it going to be met by council tax? That's my first question. And the other one is, how much of the 13 million external borrowing for this year and the 33 million required in the medium-term financial plan is directly attributed to the Dargaville?
So the additional burden on the loans from the Dargaville issue was around the 75 million mark. That may well move as plans for Parkmeans High School and Dargaville School may change. We know that construction costs go up, but start off with the 75 million mark, and that will add a loans fund servicing debt burden onto the revenue costs of the council for the length of those loans, say 20 or as old as the school is, so say 40 years. And that will directly affect the education budget, and the council will have to meet those additional costs from within the revenue budget. So that's factual, that will happen. Within that though, this is a council, if you build a village, you also attract people into that village. And with that comes additional council tax and additional school grant. So it's not a one-way sum, it's quite a complex calculation between the income side of it and the revenue costs, which would definitely include which would have been avoidable revenue costs if the developer met them. But the council has factored all of that into the budget planning. They will revise that again in September, and we'll get a clearer view what the impact on the education budget will look like. I would also say, just in context, that if you look at the SPIs for the education cost side, it's one of the lowest cost education providers of any council in Scotland. So there is room in the budget to meet these costs. I don't know if that helps.
Okay. Caroline, thank you. Great. Okay, thanks, Derek and Carol. Any other queries on the broad theme of finance?
Just on
Angela?
capital, I just wondered if I could expand a wee bit on the measures the council have taken to avoid delays. I read in the various reports about ongoing delays in the commitment that has been made in terms of capital spend, and I wondered what measures the council have put in place to avoid that happening in future.
To talk about specific measures, but I think it is worth remembering again that these are issues that we've talked about in relation to a number of councils as well aware that capital programmes across the country have been affected by cost of living and supply chain challenges. But Gary, do you want to talk specifically about the approach that council has taken to managing?
So this is a risk, and I think it's a risk that auditors going into the future will have to, and also this council is also aware of. It's not, it isn't just the audit community talking to them. They are looking at how they budget for capital going forward. There's a much closer dialogue between states, departments and planning departments about what the capital planned expenditure will look like, and building in contingency schemes that they could bring forward if some schemes are unable for whatever reason to go ahead. But it's one of the significant risks I think the Renfrewshire faces, because it's such a large capital programme, really ambitious capital planning, 700 million or so over the next 20 years. So it's one of the most ambitious capital plans. And there is a real risk that they won't be able to deliver that, and that will result in opportunity costs for the people of Renfrew. So I don't know that I know the answer to that. I know the council are paying really close attention to it. There are plans in place to monitor more closely the slippage is happening within the capital programme. I think it's fair to say, and maybe across Scottish local government. Yes, it's on our radar. I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Okay, colleagues, unless there's any other queries on finance, then I'm going to move on to the second theme that I mentioned, which is transformation. I'll come to Mike, and then we'll go on to workforce and Jennifer after that. On transformation, Mike?
Thanks very much. And I think a very helpful paper, and I think what's been said already confirms the sense you've got a very solidly functioning local authority, which does do financial planning effectively. For me, as ever, it comes down to the risks that the transformation program will not deliver the structural change that takes you to sustainability. And here we've got according to the medium-term financial plan, which is literally rather outdated now, reserves play a really big role in closing the gap. So it all underlines the importance of the transformation plan. So really, I think two questions for me. One is around the track record, and you've already indicated you've got some things to say in relation to what transformation activity has been delivered so far, and how that gives us reassurance that the more fundamental service transformation, as well as more efficiencies, can happen. And the second really is around the transformation plan, acknowledging that the financial savings have not yet been worked out. It would be very helpful to get a sense of the scale and ambition of the transformation plan, the areas in which they're looking to deliver, and given that they're so crucial to sustainability in 2 or 3 years' time, how you'll be monitoring whether that program is on track to deliver. Two questions, actually.
Okay, thanks very much, Mike. Eleanor?
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll bring Gary and Adrian in a moment. And obviously you'll appreciate that the thematic for the current audit year is transformation. So we'll be looking in this in much more detail again in the next few weeks as well. But like many council, transformation and reform efficiency saving isn't new, and I think for Renfrewshire they have gone through change programs and reform and transformation programs in a number of different guises. So the current transformation and change program is called Right for Renfrewshire, and that was introduced in 2019. It was initially envisaged as a 3-year program, but obviously had to be paused as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the council reports that between 2020 to 2025, the programme delivered 26 million of savings. Examples of the transformation activity that's been undertaken, and I think there are a couple of really good examples actually in the Best Value Workforce thematic around digital. So examples including the use of digital solutions, and again the Accounts Commission has previously highlighted the work of the Renfrewshire Council around digital exclusion actually, and how it is adopted and supported digital solutions in a way that supports those as well, that the digital exclusion agenda. And I'm bringing Gary and the team to talk a bit more about some of the other examples. In terms of that, the focus of the current phase of the transformation programme, I think there are a number of areas, again, including digital service redesign projects, strategic procurement and commissioning, the use of place-based assets, as well as income generation. I'm not sure yet, though, whether we have detail, but I'll bring in Gary to correct me otherwise in terms of that scale and ambition. But I think as the council updates its medium-term financial strategy this September, I think how it articulates the scale of ambition of the Renfrewshire, the Right for Renfrewshire programme will be key, I think, in setting out how the transformation work contributes to that financial stability. But Gary, Adrian, I'll bring you in to.
I've got no concern. Don't really have anything to add to Helena's answer, other than partnership working will be an important part of service reform, so how you work in partnership with other organisations. Just in addition to the list that Helena provided, there are a couple of hooks within the report. So one is greater clarity around the use of business cases and options appraisal for all aspects of the council's been quite robust in telling me that they do use options appraisal, but as auditors, we would like to see that much more clearly articulated and become a part of the business as usual way of keeping plans. So they are clearly thinking about options. And they've clearly set out the success criteria for any reform programme in advance. So you can monitor and track against those success criteria and benefit realisation over time. So when we see this reform package in much more detail, I think we'll be able to come back to you maybe and tell you whether or not the council has a robust framework of governance and around measurement and tracking of benefits to enable those things to those reform programmes to be effective. And we're too early at this stage to really provide that assurance to you. But we've just done the thematic audit on transformation, which is about to be reported and so in the coming weeks.
I think Adrian wants to find out, we might want to say a little bit more about the governance, I suppose, of the transformation work as well, but Adrian.
Yeah, just I will be careful about what to say because the work is ongoing, but the work on transformation that we're doing is coming to an end. We have seen evidence of digital transformation and savings, the current savings generated as a part of that. And the council is looking forward, and I think that the direction is still continue with the digital, and we see quite a lot of automatic processes, things like that used at the council. So it seems that it will be the direction of things as well. But we will conclude in our report, in our thematic report.
Thanks, Adrian. Mike, anything?
I think that's a full an answer as is feasible to have at this stage.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mike. Anything else on transformation?
Yeah, could I just come back a split that links to an earlier question about the tracking of savings? In terms of governance, is the transformation programme reporting separately? I'm conscious when you spoke earlier about savings being embedded within service budgets. I'm just wondering about the transparency around the programme.
So again, Adrian might want to say a bit more, but there is a transformation board that provides strategic oversight, and I believe there'll be regular updates.
Yes, we see reporting, and I remember you can also see like high level savings breakdown. So when in the report it says 190 million of savings delivered to transformation, other programs, there is narrative that goes to the board, and there is a chart which shows you how much of that is through this debt smoothing treasury works, how much of that is through transformation and savings program. So this is high level view, and then there's detail well reported to the board.
I just had one other question, thank you. I noted in the report, Helena, that you say that the council work really well with other local authorities, neighbouring local authorities in collaboration with them where that's appropriate. I did see subsequently that the council has recently decided not to go ahead with sharing audit and counter fraud services with some local authorities. Do you expand on that?
Yeah, I think I could discuss the detail, but I think my sense is that the council has given this some direct consideration. It's looked at the delivery model structures and the audit plans around internal audit, and I think concluded that little potential for efficiencies and further work around further work will be required around information sharing. So I think, as we all know, value for money is an important consideration. And I think in this instance, that the conclusion was that this would not represent value for money. But as you said, they do have other arrangements around shared services as well. But Gary, I don't know if you've got any more.
I think Helena's answered that, and individual councils will have their own value for money judgment in relation to the same issue. But I think from the evidence that we've seen, Renfrewshire Council's judgment in this case seems about right.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Unless there's any other queries on transformation, then I'm going to go on to the third team, which was workforce and Jennifer, and then I'll come to community engagement and back to Angela after that. Jennifer.
On the workforce, I'm going to try and divide my questions into sort of two areas, if that's helpful. So the first one first, and think probably worth saying up front, encouraging, I think, to see in your report, Helena, the sort of positive view about all the work the council is doing in its workforce, and then in the more detailed thematic report, lots of good evidence about how the council is working to try and develop its workforce plans and deliver its people strategy. The two areas I particularly wanted to pick up on, the first one is around the organisational culture piece. I was interested, and I think a number of colleagues were interested in the cultural assurance model. We've had a number of conversations around this table about how do councils assess their organisational culture. So I'm just interested if we can expand on kind of what specifically prompted Renfrewshire to want to do this work, and how is it using the model to drive improvement, and is it doing anything to encourage others to adopt the model? Because it's the first time I think we've seen explicitly, calling out in an audit report how a council is assessing its culture.
Thank you. So I think the culture assurance model is potentially the first of its kind that we've seen, and it was developed with the improvement service using the public service improvement framework, and I see it as a direct response to the Commission's previous concerns, as expressed in their deliberation of my statutory reports on council culture, and direct response to it, wanting to get a bit more into that. As part of the development, I understand that the improvement services and the officers looked at examples elsewhere in private sector and looked at research that would constitute a positive organisational culture. But Gary might want to say a little bit more about the model itself. I think it's definitely something that we'll want to look into in more detail, and I understand that the council are working with the national heads of the HR group to discuss the approach with other councils, and they will be interested in using the CAM model as part of their own self-assessment. So I think that's definitely something that we'll want to understand a little bit more of going forward. In terms of the follow-up, I understand that part of the process involved target groups completing a survey, and response rates for that was high, followed by a series of workshops. And as a result of those workshops, 5 improvement actions were identified. They are being embedded into the corporate improvement plan, and they're mainstreamed where necessary in service improvement plan. So definitely a really interesting area. Gary, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on the model itself.
I think this is indicative of a council that really is hearing about council culture. So it's of trying to find a way that it can gain a better insight into council culture, which happens at different places in the council. There isn't a council culture. The works department will be different from the corporate department and so on. But they want a model that enables them to have touch points, understand what's happening in relation to cultural issues across the council, and to take action where they think we need to. So there are 4 key themes. It's leadership, people, collaborating, learning and listening, and ethics and governance. And they go out and do these touch points, and they come back and say, what do we need to learn or do differently, either in parts of the council or across the council. And then they have an action plan where they take action that they think will make a difference. And this doesn't happen in one part and then it's done. It's a continuous process. And hopefully through that, one is, I think as a council showing a commitment to culture, positive cultures, and also continuous improvement. And it gives me a little bit more confidence in difficult to find models like that in council. So we were quite pleased to see that.
Thanks, Gary.
Really, really helpful. So the sort of second area I just wanted to explore was around the kind of whole workforce planning piece. And I suppose it's a theme around the measuring of the impact of workforce plans. There's quite a bit of reference in your report, Helena, and Gary in the ASITS report about there's lots of good stuff happening, but are the council doing enough to have KPIs in place, measurement that the things they're doing are making a difference? And I just wondered whether you could give us an update on are the recommendations about needing to get those things in place to measure the benefit of things actually now getting there? Are they able to track that the things they're doing are working? And because do lots of fabulous stuff, but it's only going to make a difference to the council future workforce if they know it's all delivering what it should be delivering.
So I think a report was taken to the Finance Resources and Customer Services Policy Board in February 2025, which set out the KPIs that will now be in place.
I appreciate February isn't that long ago, but do we know if they've got baseline measures against those KPIs, and are they heading in the right direction, or is it too early to say?
So unless Gary and Adrian tell me otherwise, I don't think we've audited that work yet,
Right.
and that was something that we will be looking at as part of the follow-up work.
Thank you. I'm happy.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. And colleagues, anything else on workforce, Malcolm?
Yeah, just a very quick question, Helmut. There's quite a bit in the report about blended, flexible, hybrid working in the council. And I just wondered, are the council planning to, or have they carried out any evaluation of benefits or drawbacks of the approach, and any impact on productivity, one way or the other?
So again, this is an area that the auditors highlighted as a recommendation in the best value thematic. And I think the council has committed to investigate what measures might help the board more constant and robust understanding of productivity. Again, I'm not sure that we've done the audit work to know whether that's happened, but again, it's follow-up.
Yeah, we have seen the start of it, so we have seen the KPIs in place, but we have of course seen that the council is looking at the workforce profile and asking questions about this to see what's the impact it has on different workers, how they work, and by department.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. Okay, Malcolm, yes. Is there anything else on workforce then? Colleagues, I'll move on to the fourth theme, which is community engagement, and Angela, and then I'll go on to performance after that, and it's Nicola. But Angela first on community engagement.
Thank you. And thanks again for everything that's in the report. There was a lot, understandably, on community engagement, and I think it was really reassuring just to see the steps that the council has taken and the progress that's been made in terms of their updated policy and the like. And I did note, you said it earlier, Helena, that there will be an annual review of how that's operating across the services. I just wondered to what extent you're seeing, or the council is seeing, that consultation flowing in to active decision making and policy development.
There's a couple of elements of this. I think there are particular areas of where consultation or particular programs designed around community involvement. So, for example, my report talks about the participatory budget program, which has allocated 1.2 million over a 3-year period. There's also the Celebrating Friendship Fund designed by and for young people. So there are particular programs, I think, that are around engaging communities in specific areas of decision making. I suppose the other part, as you said, is really around the consultation and how that informs and engages decision making. And I think this is obviously an area I've highlighted previously. I think it's important to recognise as well that the council does have some difficult decisions to make, and those decisions won't always be popular, but it's how communities are engaged as part of that. And I think that's really what I hope to see through the community engagement framework and the toolkit that's being developed. But I think the points that the audit team have also made around openness and transparency of decisions is really key here as well. And I know that the council has committed to take that work forward. But Gary, I don't know if you want to kind of talk a bit more about what you've said.
So what's in the report speaks for itself, I think, so I don't want to add anything additional to that. The council, like any council, can give countless examples of community engagement initiatives that are having an effect locally. I think there is something different. So in the report, if you step back from that and take a helicopter view of that, we're looking at a golden thread about what the priorities are for community engagement, how those translate into budget allocation, success criteria, and then when you're doing your options appraisal and business cases, that's happening at a community engagement level as well. So you know the success criteria you're trying to achieve, the outcomes you're trying to achieve from community engagement, and you're able to track and monitor those. It's not just finance that works like that. It should be lots of parts of the service that work like that. And the policy's only just in the last 6 or 8 months been reviewed and renewed, and lots of activity is happening. And as auditors, we're stepping back from that and saying, well, the council, let's let you tell us the story of whether or not you think you're achieving all that activity and all that spend, the outcomes you hope for, is having an impact that you thought it would, or if it's not, how is that going to change your approach? That's a work in progress.
Okay. And I take the point about transparency. I think that is key, because the decisions are just going to get even more difficult, aren't they? And we do know the impact that that's having on the behaviour of citizens towards elected members. So I think as a commission, we need just to reflect on that as well. Just one final thing on that then, for me anyway, is in terms of that engagement, how representative is it of the either geographical communities or communities of interest?
And we kind of widespread across a range of communities. So each council area has a fund that they can apply within their local area, and it's like a bidding fund for community engagement work, and all of the wards within the council bid for that work, and you can see community engagement activity. And there's some great examples actually. Whenever you see this, there's a wonderful example, and it's spread across the Renfrewshire area. So we were able to observe that. And, you know, the amounts are, you can imagine these things compared to the overall budget, not, and you know, can be small amounts, but they can make a big impact on the local area.
Thank you. That's okay. Anything else on community engagement? We happy with that theme? So I'll move on to the 5th theme then, which is performance, and Nicola's going to lead on that, and then we'll come to the last one, leadership, and Malcolm will take us on that in due course. But first on performance.
Again, just to echo my appreciation for the suite of reports, I think they're really excellent reading it, and I do think that you can see that Renfrew's on an upward trajectory from everything that we've seen. So I liked what you just said, Gary, in respect of that helicopter view, and that's where my thinking was around the council's overarching priorities being on inequalities, tackling inequalities, and on climate change. So in respect of inequalities, what specific actions are there in place to tackle inequalities? And I suppose, as you've described, there are lots of different areas of activity, but I guess in terms of that overarching priority, where does it all hang together? What's the strategic overall action around inequalities? And is there any evidence of the impact of all of that breadth of work taken in the round, I guess?
So a couple of things now, bringing Gary as well. So I think Renfrewshire has a Fairer Renfrewshire programme, which is aimed at interventions to tackle poverty and inequality, and this brings together a range of different activities, and there are a number of examples set out in the leadership thematic, I think, which give evidence to that, and Gary might want to talk about some of those. I think the question around impacts is always a difficult one. There's lots of different metrics and measures within that, but I suppose just to pull out a couple that feel important and of interest. One would be the poverty-related attainment gap. So this has widened since the council first started reporting on it in 2018-19, but I think since then improvement can be seen, and in 23-24 the gap narrowed for both literacy and numeracy and has returned to pre-pandemic levels. So I think in terms of one of those areas of focus, I think that feels really important. Percentage of leavers going to positive destinations is another, I think, area of focus, and Renfrewshire now has the 5th highest leaver destination figure in Scotland, as set out in the follow-up report. But Gary, I don't know if you want to say any more about action and impact.
Not very much, and I think that has covered the important area. Areas of local, there was a project in the Gala Hill area of Renfrewshire, which is a relatively poor area, and where child poverty rates were quite high. And Renfrewshire, as a part of an overall approach, went in and come up with a range of actions, community driven, to try to impact on child poverty outcomes in that area, to make an impact on the. So that's one level of that. At a more strategic level, they're undertaking a lot of actions. One of the challenges, I guess, from the external audit team has been on those attainment outcomes. If your strategy, this golden thread idea, if your key strategy from a policy perspective is to impact on educational attainment level, then you need to be really clear about what your outcomes are going to be. So what does success? So you may be in the top tier, but if you've got a very, if you come from a very wealthy area, that may only be an acceptable rather than an outstanding achievement. We've been saying to this council, but I think it may apply to lots of councils, you need to articulate to us as auditors your own view of what good is, rather than whether this outcome is good, is it good enough? And we've been attainment, I think, and areas like that, I think is an area where all councils, I think, should be really clear about what level of spend and resources they're putting into that, why that's appropriate, and what output. So still work to do in that overall area.
Just to say thank you, I think that's really helpful, and I particularly agree with your point about, what does good look like?
Yeah.
And we know that in the rounds, this is a council that does benefit from relatively low levels of poverty.
Yeah.
So, and in my view, and I appreciate it's early days in terms of the subgroup of the leadership group, as I understand it, that is focusing in on the tackling inequalities agenda overall. But I do think it's important that there is a focus on cohorts of individuals who may be left behind. And that's certainly where I would be looking to see progress over future years. The only other question really in relation to the performance, and it kind of connects in with everything, I guess, is just about the linkages between service improvement and financial performance. So, certain service areas, for example, we know that education has particularly ring-fenced budgets, as do social care. Is there an impact on other service areas as a result of dedicated focus on those examples? Probably starting on my Gary. I think it's difficult to do that question justification without a full econometric model that's looking at controlling for cost and other factors to understand the impact of spend on outcomes. Because as you know, there's a number of different areas that could affect outcomes. I guess a couple of things that I'd highlight though in that regard. One, Gary's already mentioned actually, which is interesting, that on cost for education across the three LGBF indicators, Renfrewshire actually does very well with low cost of education. And I think as my report highlights, again, using the LGBF indicators for education, Renfrewshire's performance is among the top 10 councils on 14 out of 18 indicators, with the 4 remaining indicators being close to the national average. On the social care side, I suppose I just highlight that Renfrewshire consistently being one of the better performing areas around delayed discharge. On the LGBF indicators more generally, I think it's probably the performance has stayed more constant compared to the base year. But I think without an econometric model, I think that might be the best that I could offer in that regard.
Thanks, Alan. Gary's got nothing to add. Right. Okay, thanks. Nicola, okay?
Yeah.
Derek, you okay? Yeah. Any other queries then, colleagues, on performance theme? If not, that then takes us on to the final 16, which is leadership. And Malcolm, you're going to lead us off on this?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, obviously, thank you for the reports, which are really very easy to read. Appreciate it. I note that a lot of good work in terms of officer training and development, which I think we've noted in the past, and it's also good to see now reference to member development. Now, I think you can enforce training to a certain extent with officers, but members it's more difficult, say, for some statutory requirements such as licensing training. So I just, with that in mind, I just wondered what has been the uptake, how well has the training and development been taken up by members, and early days, I accept, but is there any noticeable impact on how members are undertaking their scrutiny role particularly?
Thanks, Mark.
I'm not sure that we've audited specifically member take-up of training programs, although my report does outline, I suppose, that what the training offer is, but I don't know whether we've looked specifically at take-up. But Gary, I wonder if it's helpful if you share some of your observations from the Audit Risk and Scrutiny Board in particular, which has obviously been an area of focus.
This is, I take up as patchy, so that some of the training is fully attended and fully engaged in, and other parts of the training are less well attended. It's not one size that fits all. In relation to ARSD, which is their Audit Risk and Scrutiny Board training, that was about 100%. Everyone attended that training. Adrian and I are delivering a training course for them in external audit and the role of audit committees in local government and external audit 19. So they are much more coming to us and to others, internal audit and other providers, to ask us for training. And I think that's a marked difference, a positive change. I don't think that may not have happened 3-4 years ago. So we're seeing members asking for specific training that otherwise they would not have asked for. So I think that's positive. But possibly we should get back to you in a future audit report if the member take up of training looks like this and do a little bit more analysis of
that. Very quickly, but it's maybe unfair to ask. I don't suppose you probably have the answer to this. But is there any notable difference between newer members who elected 2017, 2022, or those that have been there for a long time? The old folks, if you like, are they less inclined to?
I don't think I'm able to answer.
No, that's fair enough.
It is, but it is something potentially we look at in the future audit.
Well, I'll not take that as an offending
No, I
comment.
want
As a previous old talk.
Yeah,
Thanks, Mark. Anything else on leadership, colleagues? Jennifer.
Malcolm rightly signalled we've seen a lot in the past on the kind of officer leadership development, and I noticed that featured in your report. I just wondered whether you've got anything about how the council is assessing the improvement in its overall leadership effectiveness as a result of that training, and in particular whether there's any emphasis in thinking about succession planning. I mean, quite a lot of what we've talked about today is clearly being driven by a leadership cohort in the council who are very committed to thinking about the culture and everything else. Therefore, I would hope they're thinking about who their successors will be on that journey as and when the current leadership, move on to other things. Is there anything you've seen in your audit work around succession planning for leadership?
Yeah, Gary, do you want to come in specifically on succession planning? I suppose just skipping back a little bit to the leadership development programme, which we've talked about before, and I think as one of my previous reports highlighted, after the first cohort went through that programme, the council and the improvement service took a moment to evaluate the programme and adapt it based on feedback for subsequent cohorts. I think now that a number of more cohorts have gone through that, there is work underway to assess and evaluate that leadership development programme. I think really important actually that they've done alongside the work around the corporate assurance model as well, and how they bring all of that together with employee engagement and then think about what the next steps are around that. And I know that work is ongoing. But Gary, do you want to say anything about succession planning?
Maybe two things. The first is that there has been quite a meaningful change at leadership level within this council in the last 3 or 4 years. Quite a number of senior posts have changed, and that's changed the tone of the council, and lots of what you see in our report reflect new minds and new thinking into the council. And in the Reform Renfrewshire programme, part of that inevitably includes you're going to change working practices, you're going to change systems and processes, potentially structures will also change, and part of that thinking involves a workforce planning element of the Reform Renfrewshire programme. So they are thinking about succession planning, but not for the same role. It might be different skills that are needed, or a different type of leader that's needed in the future.
Peter? Let's listen to anything else on leadership, Mike?
It's not, it's just one,
Just general,
I was
that's
just
fine.
reflecting on the performance stuff. Because one of the questions for me was if over time they've slipped by a material amount in relative terms. Did I understand you correctly to be saying that, as it were, in those areas to which they've given priority, they haven't slipped, and it's in the areas which they've decided to deprioritize that explains the slippage?
Yeah, so I didn't cover wider areas, I suppose. So I didn't offer a commentary on wider performance outcomes. I just focused on performance within education and payment and social care. I think I need to remind myself of the general LGBF performance.
Yeah, I mean, the general answer is no. So if you take educational attainment as a policy priority area, that has reported some slippage, for example. So it's not a clear picture across the board. One of the things the best at, for example, the high performing council is in delayed discharges, which requires working across a range of sectors and stakeholders. So, it's still relative. One of the things we've said is that going forward in Golden Thread, you need to be really clear about why some outcomes from LBGF are, whether or not you're happy with. That's something to look for in the future audit reporting.
And I think, sorry, I just refer back to that as well to paragraph 32, which is a commentary on all of the LGBF performance indicators and shows that across those 57% in the top 2 quartiles, where compared to 63%. But again, we know that across the sector overall.
Okay, thanks. Mike, okay. Let's any other questions then, colleagues? I think we've covered all of the 6 themes: finance, transformation, workforce, engagement, performance and leadership. Thanks very much, Helena, Gary and Adrian, for a very full and wide-ranging discussion on all those topics. And thanks to colleagues. I think you've managed to help me keep on time. And thanks also to our colleagues from Renfrewshire. I know there's some online and a couple of colleagues from Renfrewshire in the room as well. And as I said at the start of the topic, we're going to have a break in a minute. And you're very welcome to stay and have an informal chat with us over coffee if you want, or you can escape. It's up to you. But thanks everybody for helping me keep that structured and on schedule. And I think we will obviously now, after the break, come back to this and discuss in private how the Commission wants to take this forward. But I think with that, I'll hand back to the chair, to Joe. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And clearly, they're more scared of you than me.
I don't know if that's good or bad. No, I know.
Thanks. I think, yes, it's handed back to me to actually say we're definitely going to have a coffee break and invite everybody to be back in the room for 11:20, please.
Yeah.
Stay with them.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome back. Now on to item 6 in our agenda, local government policy update, and hand over to Joe Chapman, policy manager.
Very much, Chair. Just a couple of verbal updates to give on this one. You'll be aware, of course, that the programme for government was announced last week by the Scottish Government. I'll do a brief summary of the sort of local government related aspects in the June report. In the meantime, there are some useful analyses by LGIU, by the Fraser of Allender, and in particular depth by SPICE, the Scottish Parliament Information Centre. As SPICE sets out quite clearly, there's relatively little that's significant and new. Certainly in relation to local government, but some would say in general in the programme for government. Although Fraser of Allender did make the point that might be something to do with the fact that because of the timing of the programme, it's sort of within a year for which the budget's already been set, whereas it would normally fall at a sort of pre-budget stage. That's perhaps why it's sort of largely restaged to bring together existing policies and initiatives. Second update is around the Scottish Government's medium-term financial strategy and the sustainability delivery plan. So that was originally due to be published on the 29th of May. That's been pushed back to the last week of June. Now, the reason given is because of the timing of the UK government spending review in June. Although that had been known about for some time, the government did still intend to put out the MTFS before that. The Scottish Fiscal Commission, obviously, we have Professor Roy with us later in the day. They have responded. It's fair to say they're not particularly happy about the delay, and they intend to still produce their forecasts on the 29th of May as planned, and will then do the follow-up that goes alongside the MTFS when it comes out. And I know that the Scottish Parliament's Finance Committee has also responded, it's fair to say, to the delay as well in a similar way. They're the only two verbal updates I wanted to give. Happy to take any questions on anything that's in the report.
So thanks again, and a really helpful summary and lots of good links that gives us a chance to understand some of the key issues. Does anybody have any additional? Carol and then Derek.
Sheltered housing company. Have they looked at whether they could be repatriated for some of the homeless? Sometimes this needed work, but
It's difficult to know what the sort of outcome will be in terms of the accommodation. Obviously, they're looking to give up ownership of those compacted. But there are a range of options they're considering in terms of what's going to happen to people who are living there. And so I think it's quite an early stage. So hard to know whether that's going to be something that can be sort of used for the homelessness situation. But yeah, they've certainly said it's going to happen over a long period of time, and saying they're going to sort of tailor and consult with people affected for them first of all.
Eric.
Thanks, Chair. A few comments and observations on the report. First one was section 5 in the Medium Parliamentary. The second bullet point about funding of IJVs. Now, this might be my ignorance, so maybe start off with a qualification. But the Minister pointed out the current model is as set out in legislation. What is the current model? Given the funding goes through NHS and councils, I wasn't necessarily sure there was a funding model per se. And I suppose the following comment might also be got set out in legislation within ministerial power to change legislation. So I'm not sure what the current funding model versus. So I don't know if you know anything more, Joe. Fair question.
I think from the legislative point, because it's set out in primary legislation, which is the Public Bodies Joint Working Act, that was what was being referred to, it would require primary legislation to amend that. So it wouldn't be within the power of the government to single-handedly change that, so it would take a period of time. So I think that the meaning of the response in a way was around it's not something that can be changed overnight. You have to go through that kind of process. As for the details of how much of it is that set out in legislation and how rigid that is, I'm not too sure. Obviously, we have a couple of different models in place, and obviously Highland do a different way to the rest of the country. Yeah, I think it was a response to almost a request to consider as a government policy changing the.
No, that's what I think. I didn't think there was a rigid funding model in this stuff. And Okay, thanks. The second question I had was paragraph 28. I suppose it maybe links to a bit of an update in the Verity House agreement, but I suppose I was concerned when I read this that NSP is calling for a revaluation of, and I think probably everybody would say that revaluation is long overdue, but it would have huge implications for the grant distribution model of the local government. I don't think it's something you can do in isolation. So I don't know if this is something that's been taken forward under the Verity House agreement, and if we do know where that's perhaps brought to.
I'm not aware of anything being taken forward other than the process that's underway between the government and COSLA to consult and explore, options and different ways of doing things in the future. But especially given where we are in terms of parliamentary schedule, it's not something that's likely to come to fruition for the next election. That sort of, to an extent, kicks it a bit further down the road. Certainly, the committee was basing its recommendations based on the evidence that it had taken as part of the inquiry, and obviously there's quite a groundswell opinion that needs a lot to be desired, that it's based on valuations from 1991, and so something should be done about that. But I can see it being another addition to the list of positions on that. But I don't think there's anything imminent going to happen.
I think the problem is that valuations across Scotland have moved significantly and not the same level, so that it would distort the whole funding mechanism.
And there's a series of recommendations in the committee report around things that would have to be put in place to mitigate the impact of that. I think Sarah's also one who's coming on that.
I'm now slightly distant from the Verity House agreement, but Derek, we're meeting with Jane O'Donnell and Miriam Kelly from COSLA next week. So we could pick that up and feedback to the commission members if there's any update on that.
One other question was council leadership change. Probably more for Eleanor. Have we got to find what's happening outside there? And should we be concerned about that?
So I spoken to the auditor, maintaining this.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Joe? Go on.
Just in terms of the programme for government, I appreciate it came out after the paper was written, so I know that you've said you'll bring some more information into the next meeting, but I did wonder, given our recent publication around additional support for learning, there was a commitment in the programme for government to a £100 million fund across the authorities. We know is not huge, to fund wraparound childcare and holiday provision for children with additional support needs. I've not been able to find out from anyone that I've asked so far whether it's new money or rebadged money, devil in the detail, etc. I just wondered whether you knew of anything further around that. Joe, I did read the LGIU analysis, and it didn't appear to be able to, they hadn't been able to determine whether it's new money or rebadged of it. Just wanted to flag that.
Thanks. I take that on board in terms of the information in the next month's report, and also I don't know if you've looked at the SPICE report. They do go through in a lot of detail and are quite objective around what is and isn't new and what isn't included that has been mentioned in the past and things like that. So they take quite a in context view of everything. So it's worth looking at. But I'll try to look into that.
Thanks. No, I will go through this bit.
Okay. I think we're getting slight prompts back from the other room to make sure people just speak up. And the microphone is sitting in the centre of the table, but if you could just make sure you're clear, that would be helpful. Thanks. No other questions for Joe? Again, good report. Thanks, Joe. No doubt if you look through it and read more and you've got questions, go back to Joe. You're happy to answer further questions. That takes us to item 7, which is my update, Chair's update. I have been ill and I have been doing appraisals, but I have also done a fair bit of stuff. So I wanted to highlight specifically attending COSLA's 50th anniversary reception at the Scottish Parliament. Interesting that they held it at the Scottish Parliament, but nonetheless it's not the Scottish Parliament. Other members were there too, and it was a well-attended session where we had senior civil servants, politicians, and the Perm Sec, although we didn't manage to speak to the Perm Sec. So I think that's something we do want to probably address in the next 2 or 3 months. The speakers were Ariana Burgess, Sean Robinson, the COSLA president, Sean Robinson himself, and the vice president of COSLA, Stephen Heddle, and then Sir Neil McIntosh, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. He was the original chief exec of Strathclyde Regional Council, who helped set up the parliamentary process, and in doing so disbanded himself in his role. And we were wondering what age he was, because he was fantastic and articulate and interesting. So it was very interesting. I am looking forward to the Graham Roy session, because it's an area of work that help us understand the broader context within which our challenge on transformation and our challenge around efficiency savings and our challenge around budgets becomes even clearer. And then finally, I just want to confirm the members are coming with me and Sarah to the Argyll and Bute Best Value Report on the 28th of May. Will be Derek and Ruth as our auditors with us. I'm happy to take up any questions that anybody has. Cheers. That takes us to item 8. Any other business in public session? That takes us to the end of the private session. Can I make sure that the camera is off? Recording is off.